On June 6th, 2023, the most dangerous weapon deployed in Ukraine wasn't it wasn't an hypersonic missile.
Right, not at all.
It wasn't a drone swarm, and it definitely wasn't a column of armored tanks. I mean, it was gravity, just gravity, combined with like 18 cubic kilometers of water.
Which is just an unfathomable amount of water when you really try to picture it.
It really is. And when the Kakhovka Dam breached, we basically witnessed this terrifying inversion of reality. Because, we look at millions of tons of steel and concrete holding back a literal inland sea, and it feels like a triumph, right?
Yeah, a triumph of human order over natural chaos. You look at it and think, well, we've conquered nature, we've walled it in.
Exactly. But then literally overnight, that infrastructure was transformed from this life-sustaining artery into a weapon of mass destruction.
It completely shatters that illusion of permanence that our modern society relies on so heavily. We just assume the foundation of our civilization is fixed.
Like our power grids and drinking water.
Exactly, our agricultural systems. We think they are these immutable realities. But when you introduce the grim reality of modern warfare and you strip away those social restraints, you see what human beings are truly capable of.
Which is pretty dark.
It is. You realize that our greatest engineering achievements are actually our most catastrophic vulnerabilities.
Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today, we are taking a deep dive that spans, thousands of years, honestly. We're pulling together two distinct but really profoundly connected stacks of notes for you today.
Yeah, two very different sources.
Right. On one side, we have this rigorous, heavily detailed geopolitical and ecological analysis of the Kakhovka Dam disaster on the Dnipro River.
And on the other, we have a rigorous theological exposition of an ancient prophecy from the 8th century BC, specifically Isaiah chapter 8.
Which, it might seem like a really unusual pairing at first glance for you listening.
Yeah.
Like a modern forensic analysis of hydro warfare and an ancient biblical text.
It does sound like a stretch, but when you look at events like Kakhovka merely through the lens of secular sociology or, a military strategy, you miss the point.
Even environmental science.
Right, even that. If you only use those lenses, you are only looking at the surface. You completely miss the deeper underlying spiritual realities that actually govern human history.
And human nature, yeah. And when you see the news of massive floods and ecological ruin and human suffering on this scale, it is so easy for you to feel completely overwhelmed.
Oh, absolutely. It feels like the world is just spinning off its axis.
Like it's just driven by the whims of tyrants.
Yeah.
But our mission today, our goal for this deep dive, is to look at these earthly horrors through the unchanging lens of biblical truth.
We want to anchor our understanding in the sovereign providence of God.
Exactly. Finding that ultimate arc of safety when the floodgates of human depravity are just thrown wide open. So let's start with the physical reality on the ground in the summer of 2023.
Let's do it.
I really want to understand the sheer scale of this for a second. Because what does it actually mean to turn a river into a weapon? Set the scene for us based on the geopolitical notes.
Well, to understand the magnitude of the catastrophe, we first have to understand the geography and the engineering of the Dnipro River. The Dnipro isn't just, a body of water.
Right, it's massive.
It is the principal artery of Ukraine. It runs straight through the political, demographic, and economic heartland of the entire country. And during the Soviet era, engineers didn't just leave the river alone.
They completely transformed it.
They did. They built this cascade of 6 massive reservoirs. So they took a free-flowing river and turned it into this highly engineered, interconnected staircase of water.
The staircase of water. That's a great way to picture it.
Yeah, and this system was designed to provide hydropower, navigation for huge shipping vessels, municipal drinking water, and flood regulation.
Not to mention irrigation for millions of acres of farmland. So it's essentially this massive continental plumbing system. Where exactly is the Kakhovka Dam in that sequence?
Kakhovka was the very lowest step in that massive cascade. It formed the final anchor point before the river emptied out into the Black Sea.
Wait, so that means it's holding back an immense volume of water with no other safety net below it, like nothing else to catch the water.
That is precisely the issue. And on the early morning of June 6, 2023, while that facility was under Russian military control, that massive concrete anchor breached.
Wow.
Yeah. Tens of millions of cubic meters of impounded water surged uncontrollably into the lower Dnipro floodplain. And the immediate physical result was the inundation of roughly 620 square kilometers of territory.
Across 4 different Ukrainian oblasts. And let me just stop you there, because the term oblast gets thrown around in the news a lot.
It does.
For those of you not familiar with Eastern European geography, what exactly is an oblast?
It's essentially an administrative region, so it's roughly equivalent to a state or a province in North America.
Okay, so we are talking about a flood wave that crossed major jurisdictional boundaries, just swallowing up towns and villages.
And farmland, yeah, across a massive swath of southern Ukraine. To put 620 square kilometers in perspective for you, you are looking at an area roughly the size of the entire city of Chicago, completely submerged.
That is just staggering. Chicago underwater. And what about the human toll? What do the sources say about the cost?
Well, the breach directly affected roughly 100,000 residents immediately downstream. The UN and the Ukrainian government did a rapid assessment in the aftermath.
Right, I remember seeing that in the notes.
And they estimated the physical damage and economic loss at almost $14 billion.
$13 billion.
Yeah, but here is the critical caveat in our source material. That $14 billion figure, it's just a provisional accounting.
It's just a baseline.
Exactly. It doesn't even come close to capturing the reality on the ground.
Because, I mean, how do you put a price tag on an entire ecosystem being wiped off the map? You can count a flooded house, sure, but you can't easily quantify the loss of a century-old wetland.
You really can't. Or the human lives lost in occupied territories, for that matter. Remember, the left bank of the river was under Russian military occupation at the time.
So they couldn't even get in there to check.
Right. Full access for international rescue workers, the Red Cross, independent investigators, it was all blocked. We simply do not have the final body count.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. And the financial estimate doesn't account for the secondary horrors either, does it?
No, it doesn't. Think about the fact that for over a year prior to the breach, both sides had heavily fortified those riverbanks.
Oh, man. The landmine.
Exactly. There were thousands of landmines and unexploded ordnance buried in the soil. When the floodwaters hit, they didn't just drown the land, they lifted those explosives up.
And just carried them away.
Carried them miles downstream and redeposited them in areas that civilians had previously considered perfectly safe.
So imagine you survive the flood, the water recedes, you go back to clean up your garden, and you step on an anti-tank mine that floated in from 50 miles away.
Yes, it's a nightmare scenario. And beyond the ordnance, there is the chemical contamination. The flood wave swept through industrial sites, chemical plants, municipal sewage treatment facilities.
Let's pick up everything.
Heavy metals, machine oil, raw sewage, and toxic sediment from the riverbed. It carried this massive toxic plume downstream that eventually emptied straight into the Black Sea.
Causing catastrophic marine die-offs, according to the source.
Exactly.
Now, I read the section in the geopolitical analysis about the Kakhovka-Type Catastrophe problem.
Yeah.
And it defines this specific type of disaster with a really disturbing phrase. Violent abundance followed by absolute scarcity.
Yes, it's a very specific paradox.
And I'm struggling to visualize how you get scarcity from a flood. I mean, if the dam breaks, isn't there just water everywhere? How is there scarcity?
This is where we have to look at the physics of how a dam actually functions. We tend to think of a dam as just a wall blocking a river, right?
There's the big plug.
But engineering-wise, a dam exists to create what is called a hydraulic head.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener. What exactly is a hydraulic head?
A hydraulic head is essentially the stored potential energy of the water. It's the difference in elevation between the high water level in the reservoir behind the dam and the much lower water level of the river downstream.
Okay, I follow you.
So the dam elevates the water, allowing it to flow into elevated canals or fall through turbines to generate electricity. It's basically a massive battery made of gravity.
I see. So it's not just a wall holding water back. It's a pedestal holding the water up high so that the surrounding region can actually reach it.
Yes, that's a perfect way to put it. So when Kakhovka was breached, the downstream communities on both the Ukrainian-held right bank and the Russian-occupied left bank drowned.
They got hit with the violent abundance.
Exactly. Homes flooded to the roof lines, roads became raging river channels, you had people stranded on rooftops begging for rescue while simultaneously dodging artillery shelling and floating landmines.
It sounds like actual hell on earth. But what happens upstream then?
Well, upstream, they experience the absolute scarcity. Because the dam is gone, the reservoir, that massive elevated artificial lake, it rapidly drains away.
Oh, because the pedestal is broken. The water just drops.
Right. And hundreds of thousands of people in southern Ukraine, including major cities like Kryvyi Rih, relied on that elevated lake for their municipal drinking water.
So their intake pipes are suddenly just sitting above the waterline.
Exactly. Major irrigation networks, like the Kakhovka Main Canal, depended on that high water level to flow into the arid agricultural lands of the south. So as the reservoir vanished, municipal intake pipes were left sucking air, stranded in miles of toxic mud.
Wow.
Canals ran completely dry. Agriculture lost its irrigation right at the start of the summer planting season.
So by breaking one piece of concrete, you drown the people below you, and you instantly dehydrate and starve the people above you.
Right.
You are literally unplugging the life support system for an entire region.
It is the instantaneous destruction of a region's energy generation, its agricultural security, and its ecological stability. And, that brings us to perhaps the most terrifying ripple effect of this scarcity.
The nuclear aspect, the geopolitical notes spend a lot of time on this.
Yes, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant.
Which is the largest nuclear power station in Europe, right?
Correct, and it's located just upstream from the Kakhovka Dam. Nuclear reactors require continuous, massive volumes of water to cool their reactor cores and their spent fuel pools.
Even when they are shut down, right?
Especially then, because the nuclear material continues to generate immense decay heat. If it isn't constantly cooled, it melts down. And the Kakhovka Reservoir was the principal external water source that kept the cooling systems of that massive nuclear plant supplied.
So when the reservoir drained, did the plant lose all its water? Because I remember the news being incredibly tense for a few days, but we didn't see a Chernobyl-level meltdown.
No, we didn't, thank God. And the source notes that the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the UN's nuclear watchdog, they reported that the plant had its own dedicated cooling pond.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and deep backup wells designed specifically for emergencies. So they were able to maintain enough water to prevent an immediate catastrophe. But the destruction of the dam drastically, terrifyingly narrowed their safety margins.
It removed all the buffer.
Exactly. It demonstrated this terrifying principle of modern conflict. A failure at one piece of hydraulic infrastructure can instantly trigger a cascading crisis at a completely different, highly hazardous installation miles away.
So we have this apocalyptic event, and the immediate question everyone asks, and honestly still asks, is who did this and how? Now, our source material is very careful to maintain strict evidentiary discipline here.
Very careful, yes. We have to be impartial with the sources.
Right. We are dealing with the fog of war. The facility was under Russian control, but both sides pointed fingers at each other. What does the actual forensic analysis tell us?
The source is meticulous about acknowledging that full forensic access to the physical site remains impossible.
Because it's an active war zone.
Exactly. You cannot send a team of structural engineers and explosives experts into a contested, heavily shelled area to take concrete samples and map blast patterns. It's just not going to happen.
But investigators didn't just throw their hands up, did they?
No, they didn't. They relied on remote sensing and physics.
Okay, how do you investigate an underwater explosion from space? That sounds like science fiction.
It does, but you look at a combination of data sets. First, investigators looked at regional seismic signals. Seismographs that are designed to detect earthquakes picked up distinct localized tremors.
Wait, tremors originating at the dam?
Exactly. At the exact coordinates of the dam, at the exact time of the breach.
Wow.
Second, they analyzed infrared satellite imagery. Satellites equipped with thermal sensors detected massive, instantaneous heat flashes at the dam. And that is the unmistakable thermal signature of high explosive detonations.
But couldn't a missile strike from the outside cause that? I mean, Ukraine was firing artillery in the region.
Yeah, that is the critical engineering question the source addresses. The concrete foundation of a hydroelectric dam is built to withstand immense, continuous physical pressure from millions of tons of water.
Plus external shocks, I'd imagine.
Exactly. A surface strike from a missile or an artillery shell might damage the roadway on top or maybe blow out some gates. But it is highly unlikely to shatter the massive concrete pedestal that anchors the dam to the riverbed.
So how do you break it then, if outside stuff won't work?
You break it from the inside. Hydroelectric dams are not solid blocks of concrete. They are built with internal galleries.
Wait, why does a dam have hollow tunnels inside it? Doesn't that just make it weaker?
Not inherently, and they are actually necessary. These internal galleries are passageways that run right through the core of the dam.
Oh, for maintenance and stuff?
Yeah. Engineers use them to inspect the structural integrity from the inside, to monitor for natural water seepage, and to house internal machinery. But strategically, in a war, they are a fatal vulnerability.
Because you can get inside the armor.
Right. If you place heavy explosives inside those galleries and detonate them, the explosion doesn't just damage the concrete. It compromises the structural integrity, while the immense hydraulic pressure of the reservoir is already pushing against it.
Ah, so you use the water's own weight to tear the crippled structure apart.
Precisely. And because Russian forces controlled the facility, meaning they held the keys to those internal galleries, the engineering consensus strongly points to an internal, intentional demolition.
Wow.
Yes. Several independent expert assessments judged Russian responsibility to be highly likely based on that specific combination of seismic, thermal, and structural evidence.
However, as the source strictly outlines, Russia vehemently denied responsibility.
They did. They initiated a massive information campaign blaming Ukraine, claiming that Ukrainian artillery or saboteurs caused the collapse.
Which really highlights another layer of modern warfare for you to think about. It's not just the physical destruction anymore. It's the immediate weaponization of the narrative.
Exactly. The source notes that in the modern era, disasters are both material and informational.
Right.
While downstream residents are literally drowning and upstream residents are watching their wells run dry, you have this parallel war of competing narratives and propaganda racing ahead of the actual evidence.
And accountability is just permanently delayed because the investigators cannot physically reach the crime scene. We are looking at an event where the devastation is absolute, the environmental consequences will last for generations, and the legal accountability might just never materialize.
It's incredibly frustrating.
It is. Now, I want to shift our focus a bit here. We've established the what and the how of the physical destruction. But reading through the geopolitical notes, I realize there's a deeply disturbing psychological and, well, anthropological question here.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
Right, like what possesses a human being to look at a life-giving resource and think, how can I use this to drown my neighbor?
It is a dark question, but it's a necessary one. Our geopolitical source outlines the actual strategic mechanisms of hydro warfare. It breaks down 4 distinct methods that belligerents use to turn hydrology into leverage.
Walk us through those 4 mechanisms, because I think it really helps frame the theological discussion we are heading toward.
Absolutely. So the first mechanism is inundation.
Okay, inundation.
This is using water to deny terrain to an enemy. You flood an area to turn solid ground into an impassable swamp. It slows down mechanized infantry, it bogs down supply lines, and it destroys bridges.
Now, to be fair to the geopolitical reality, inundation can be used defensively too, right?
That's right.
Because I recall Ukrainian forces doing something similar early in the war around Kyiv.
Yes, you're right. In 2022, Ukrainian forces deliberately breached a dam on the Irpin River.
But that was different.
It was tactical, defensive inundation. They sacrificed their own property and their own farmland to create a muddy barrier that successfully halted the Russian armored advance on the capital. But inundation can also be deeply offensive and punitive, as we saw with Kakhovka.
Right, offensive inundation. What is the second mechanism?
Deprivation.
Deprivation.
This is essentially a modern siege tactic. You attack the infrastructure cutting power to pumping stations, bombing pipelines, or draining a reservoir to deny safe drinking water to a civilian population.
Just weaponized thirst.
The goal is to apply unbearable pressure, forcing a city to capitulate or face mass dehydration and disease.
That is just horrific. You don't have to fire a single bullet into a crowd. You just turn off the tap and wait for them to surrender or die.
It's brutal. The third mechanism is contamination.
Okay, how does that work?
This involves deliberately making existing water supplies unusable or dangerous. This can be done by striking industrial facilities so they leak oil or chemicals into a river, or destroying wastewater treatment plants so raw sewage flows into drinking reservoirs.
So the water is there, but if you drink it, you get sick.
Right. It creates this lingering, invisible psychological terror. Authorities can't even confidently tell civilians if it's safe to boil the water, let alone drink it or use it for crops.
And the fourth mechanism, because I read the term hostage-taking in the notes, and frankly, I had a hard time grasping that. I mean, how do you take a concrete dam hostage?
You take it hostage by weaponizing its vulnerability. A massive dam or nuclear plant adjacent to a reservoir holds millions of lives in the balance, right?
Yeah, we established that with the scale of Kakhovka.
So an occupying force can station troops and artillery on or near that infrastructure, essentially using it as a massive geopolitical human shield.
Oh, wow.
They broadcast a silent threat. If you try to dislodge us or if you fight anywhere near the structure, The collateral damage of a breach will be a civilian catastrophe you cannot afford.
So they use the enemy's own morality against them.
Hmm.
They know the opposing side doesn't want to cause a massive flood, so they literally hide behind the floodgates.
Exactly. And Kakhovka embodied all four of these mechanisms simultaneously.
It hit all four.
Think about it. It inundated the downstream terrain, it deprived the upstream region of its water, it contaminated the entire lower basin and the Black Sea, and it operated as a geopolitical hostage before it finally blew.
That is heavy. And this is exactly where we have to pivot to our theological source material. Because when you describe these four mechanisms, inundation, deprivation, contamination, hostage-taking, you are describing a level of calculated malice that is just deeply unsettling.
It really is.
When military commanders pull down the floodgates of creation to drown their neighbors and starve civilian populations, we aren't just observing a ruthless military strategy anymore. From a theological perspective, what are we actually looking at here?
We are witnessing a raw, terrifying, and undeniable manifestation of the Reformed doctrine of total depravity.
Okay, we need to define that carefully.
We do.
Because when people hear the phrase total depravity, they often think it means every single person is as evil as Adolf Hitler at every moment of the day. But that's not what the theological source is arguing, is it?
No, that is a very common misconception. That concept is sometimes called utter depravity, and it is restrained by God's common grace. Total depravity, as understood in the Reformed tradition and outlined in our source, means that the entirety of human nature has been corrupted by the fall.
Every part of us.
Every faculty, our mind, our will, our affections, our reasoning, it's all tainted by sin. We are not as bad as we possibly could be, but no part of us is left pure.
So how does that connect specifically to hydrowarfare?
Well, think about the nature of water. Water was given by God in creation, maintained under common grace to cultivate life.
Right. It irrigates crops, it quenches thirst, it sustains human flourishing.
Exactly. But fallen man, operating out of a totally depraved mind, looks at that beautiful, life-giving resource, and his intellect immediately calculates how to convert it into an instrument of mass devastation. The very intellect that allows humans to build a hydroelectric dam to power a city is the exact same corrupted intellect that figures out how to blow it up from the inside to drown a city. Apart from the restraining grace of God, human beings are entirely capable of unspeakable cruelty toward one another.
I want to push back on this slightly, though, or at least play devil's advocate for the listener.
Sure.
We see this in modern Ukraine, and we point to it as a sign of modern depravity. But couldn't someone argue that this is just a product of our modern technological age?
How so?
Like, that hydrowarfare is uniquely driven by the existence of these massive Soviet-era megastructures and, modern high explosives. Has humanity always been this calculated in its destruction, or is this a new phenomenon?
It is a vital question, and our historical sources answer it definitively.
Well,
This is absolutely not a new phenomenon.
it's not.
The technology changes. Sure, we use high explosives instead of bronze pickaxes now, but the depraved human impulse to weaponize creation remains exactly the same. If we look at the historical context provided in our theological notes, ancient Near Eastern monarchs were doing the exact same thing nearly 3,000 years ago.
Wait, really? They were blowing up dams in the ancient world?
Well, they didn't have high explosives, obviously, but they had immense manpower and a surprisingly deep understanding of hydrology.
Okay, color me intrigued.
In the ancient Near East, water was the absolute lifeblood of civilization, even more so than today. But it was also the ultimate weapon of siege warfare, and the kings of the Neo-Assyrian Empire were the undisputed masters of this.
Who are we talking about specifically here?
Monarchs like Tiglath-Pileser III and Sennacherib. These men were aggressive militarists, and they actually boasted in their royal annals and their stone inscriptions about destroying enemy lands by breaking dams and diverting rivers.
They bragged about it.
Yes. Sennacherib notoriously recorded his destruction of the great city of Babylon in 689 BC.
What exactly did he do to Babylon?
He didn't just burn it and tear down the walls, which was standard practice. He viewed Babylon as a perpetual threat, and he wanted to completely erase it from the earth. So, his armies dug new canals, broke the existing levees, and deliberately diverted the Euphrates River directly into the center of the city.
You're kidding.
Nope. He turned it into a flooded swamp, and he bragged in his inscriptions that he wiped away the foundations of Babylon, making its destruction more complete than the great deluge of Noah's day.
Let that sink in for a second.
Yeah.
He is comparing himself to God.
Literally, yes.
He is saying, God sent a flood to judge the earth, but my flood was better? The hubris is just almost unimaginable.
It is the ultimate expression of human rebellion. The human heart, whether it is sitting at a digital console of a modern hydroelectric plant or commanding an ancient army with spears and chariots, is identical in its fallen state.
That's a profound point.
Without divine restraint, mankind will weaponize the very foundations of creation to achieve dominance and feed its own pride.
That is a chilling parallel. And it perfectly sets the stage for our deep dive into the biblical text. We've established the modern reality of the Kakhovka breach and the ancient roots of hydro warfare in the Assyrian Empire. Now let's bring those threads together and dive into the historical setting of Isaiah chapter 8.
Yes, let's look at the text.
Because this is where God uses this exact geopolitical reality, the weaponization of rivers by the Assyrian Empire, to confront his own covenant people. Set the scene for us in 8th century BC Judah. What is happening when Isaiah receives this prophecy?
Well, to grasp the way of Isaiah 8, we have to look at the geopolitical chessboard of the 8th century BC. We are in the southern kingdom of Judah, with its capital in Jerusalem.
Check out.
The kingdom is currently being ruled by King Ahaz, and Ahaz is facing a massive existential crisis.
Who's threatening him?
The primary threat looming over the entire region is the Neo-Assyrian Empire, led by that same aggressive militarist we just discussed, Tiglath-Pileser III.
The dam breaker.
The dam breaker himself. Assyria is expanding its hegemony across the ancient Near East, crushing smaller nations, imposing heavy tributes, and deporting entire populations. They are the terrifying superpower of the day.
They are the empire that you do not want knocking on your door.
Exactly. Now, in response to this Assyrian threat, a regional anti-Assyrian coalition is formed. The northern kingdom of Israel, which the biblical text often refers to as Ephraim, and the kingdom of Syria decide to band together to resist Assyria.
Okay, so they team up.
Yes, and they want the southern kingdom of Judah to join their alliance.
They want a united front against the superpower. But Ahaz says no.
Ahaz refuses to join them. So what do Israel and Syria do? They decide they cannot afford to have a non-compliant neighbor to their south. They march their combined armies south to invade Judah, besiege Jerusalem, depose King Ahaz, and set up a puppet ruler who will join their anti-Syrian coalition.
Oh, wow. So it backfired completely on him.
Yes. This is historically known as the Syro-Ephraimite War.
So Ahaz is trapped. He's got the superpower of Assyria looming in the distance, and he's got two angry, well-armed neighbors literally camped on his doorstep trying to dethrone him.
He is terrified. The biblical text in Isaiah 7 describes the panic vividly. It says the heart of Ahaz and the heart of his people shook as the trees of the forest shake before the wind.
They were petrified.
In this moment of absolute national panic, God sends the prophet Isaiah to meet Ahaz, and Isaiah brings a message of incredible grace.
What does he tell him?
He tells Ahaz, don't be afraid of these two smoldering stumps of firebrands. Meaning Syria and Israel are burned out, they cannot destroy you, God will protect his covenant city. Just ask for a sign to confirm it.
It's an incredible moment of grace.
Yeah.
God literally gives a wicked king a blank check. He says, ask for a sign. Let it be deep as Sheol or high as heaven. God is bending over backwards to reassure him.
But Ahaz gives this hypocritical, pseudo-pious answer. He says, I will not ask and I will not put the Lord to the test.
It sounds so holy on the surface, like he's just quoting Deuteronomy or something.
It sounds holy, but it was an absolute cover-up because Ahaz had already made his decision and it had nothing to do with faith.
What did he do?
Instead of trusting in the sovereign providence and protection of God, Ahaz turned to pragmatic political maneuvering. Before Isaiah even got to him, Ahaz had already stripped the temple of its silver and gold, emptied the royal treasuries, and sent emissaries all the way to Nineveh to meet with Tiglath-Pileser III.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
He essentially sent a massive bribe to the biggest bully on the playground, hoping the bully would beat up the kids picking on him.
That is exactly what he did. We have the historical record of his message in 2 Kings 16. Ahaz wrote to the pagan king of Assyria saying, I am your servant and your son. Come up and rescue me from the hand of the king of Syria and from the hand of the king of Israel.
He called himself his servant and his son.
Yes. He chose a pragmatic foreign alliance over the covenant promises of God. He placed his trust in the terrifying military machine of Assyria rather than the quiet, steady word of Yahweh.
So we have a complete betrayal of the covenant here. Ahaz sells out his nation's spiritual birthright for temporary political security.
Exactly.
How does God respond to this? This brings us directly to the text of Isaiah 8.56, and this is where the hydro warfare imagery really comes into play.
The Lord speaks to Isaiah again, and he gives a formal, devastating indictment against Judah. The Hebrew text uses a very specific aggressive word here, maz.
Maz. What does that mean?
It means to reject with absolute contempt, to despise, or to treat something as completely worthless. God says, because this people has refused Maz, the waters of Shiloah that flow gently.
Let's pause right there. What are the waters of Shiloah? Because if you don't know the geography of Jerusalem, you completely miss the brilliance of this metaphor.
Yeah, absolutely do. To understand the metaphor, you have to understand ancient Jerusalem's water supply. The city was built on a highly defensible ridge, but it had a glaring weakness. Right. It was entirely dependent for its survival on a single water source, the Gihon Spring. The problem was, the Gihon Spring was located just outside the eastern city walls in the Kidron Valley.
Which is a terrible place for your water supply to be if you were under siege.
Obviously. So to bring the water safely into the city, an open, slow-moving aqueduct was cut along the rock to channel the water to a pool inside the city. This conduit was known as Shiloh.
Okay, the Shiloh Aqueduct.
Yes, and the text uses the Hebrew word liat to describe how this water moved. It means flowing softly, gently, quietly.
It wasn't an impressive roaring rapid then. It wasn't a mighty river. It was just a slow trickling stream.
Exactly. To the human eye, Shiloh was small, unassuming, almost pathetic. But it was entirely life-sustaining. In the biblical metaphor, Shiloh represented Yahweh's quiet, self-sufficient, covenantal grace and protection, centered in Zion.
So God is telling Ahaz, I have provided everything you need for life and security. The water is flowing, but it comes quietly. It requires patience, and it requires faith. And what did Ahaz want instead? If he rejected Shiloh with contempt, what was he looking for?
Ahaz rejected the quiet waters of Shiloh because he was mesmerized by the mighty, raging waters of the Euphrates River. In the Hebrew text of Isaiah 8, it refers to it as Hanahar, literally, the river.
Capital R.
Right. The Euphrates was vast, deep, terrifying, and prone to violent seasonal flooding. In this prophecy, the Euphrates symbolizes the massive, impressive, and utterly destructive military machine of the Assyrian Empire.
The contrast is just brilliant. Ahaz looked at God's quiet grace, the trickling stream of Shiloh, and thought it was pathetic compared to a superpower's army.
He wanted the spectacle.
It's like turning down a quiet, steady, life-giving well in your own backyard because you'd rather invite a catastrophic flash flood into your living room just because the flood looks more powerful and intimidating on television.
That is precisely the theological indictment. Fallen man consistently despises the simple, quiet means of grace provided by God. We hunger instead for the visible, impressive, militaristic power of the world.
Because it looks like it gets things done.
Right. Ahaz wanted the illusion of control and worldly power. He didn't want a quiet God who demanded faith. He wanted a violent empire that demanded gold. And he was willing to sell out his nation's soul to get it.
But there is a terrifying consequence to inviting a flood into your living room, as we talked about with Kakhovka.
Oh, definitely.
If Ahaz invited the flood by trusting in Assyria, how does God respond? Because this is where the text of Isaiah 8 moves from a poetic metaphor about water to a terrifying reality of divine judgment.
This brings us to Isaiah 8.7 through 8, where we see the terrifying irony of divine judgment. Because Judah trusted the Assyrian Empire to save them from Syria and Israel, God declares that he himself will bring up the mighty waters of the Euphrates.
Which is Assyria.
Right. The text explicitly defines it as the king of Assyria and all his glory. God says he will bring them up to overflow all its banks and sweep through Judah.
So God turns man's idol into man's executioner. Ahaz said, I want Assyria. And God says, you can have them, but they aren't coming as a gentle stream.
The geopolitical analysis we discussed earlier talked about a dam breach causing a flood that overwhelms all boundaries. Isaiah describes the Assyrian invasion using the exact same hydro-warfare terminology.
Like what?
The text uses a rapid sequence of violent Hebrew verbs. Vekalaf, which means sweep through, shataf meaning overflow or inundate, and viabar, to pass through. It describes a catastrophic, unstoppable deluge bursting every natural and artificial boundary.
It's drowning the countryside.
Sweeping away the farmlands and swallowing up the fortified cities of Judah one by one.
You can almost hear the water rising in those verbs, sweeping, overflowing, passing through. But I want to pause and address something that our theological source material emphasizes heavily in this section.
The sovereignty aspect.
Yes, there is a profound theological tension here regarding the sovereignty of God. Because we are talking about a wicked pagan empire invading a country, but the text attributes the action directly to God.
This is a crucial point, and it directly addresses the conflict between Reformed theology and systems like Arminianism according to the source.
Can you unpack that?
Sure. Arminian theology often posits a framework where God grants humans ultimate libertarian free will, and God's sovereignty is primarily seen in his ability to react to human choices or maybe look down the corridors of time to see what humans will do.
So in that view, God is somewhat passive regarding the wicked actions of men. He permits them, but he doesn't ordain them.
Right, but that is not what Isaiah 8 says at all.
No, he really is not.
Look closely at the text. The Assyrian king, Tiglath-Pileser III, sitting in his capital in Nineveh, thought he was operating completely autonomously.
Of course he did.
He thought he was expanding his empire through his own strategic brilliance, his own greed, and the power of his pagan gods. He is fully responsible for his own wicked, depraved malice.
But what does God declare?
God says, "Behold, the Lord is bringing up against them the waters of the river." The Hebrew phrase is Adonai Malala, the sovereign Lord is causing them to ascend.
God is operating the floodgates.
God is the one pulling the lever. This completely refutes any notion of pragmatic human autonomy. God directs, disposes, and governs all creatures and actions, even the destructive hydro-warfare and military conquests of wicked, depraved tyrants.
It's just mind-blowing.
The Assyrians are operating out of their own malice, fulfilling their own wicked desires, yet simultaneously and mysteriously, they are acting as the subordinate instruments of God's sovereign providence to execute his temporal judgment on Judah.
The tyrant thinks he is holding the weapon, but God is holding the tyrant. It's a staggering, awe-inspiring thought.
It is.
But it also raises a terrifying question about the severity of this judgment, because the text goes on to describe the physical depth of this flood. Verse 8 says, "This rushing deluge of Assyrian military might will sweep into Judah and it will reach even to the neck."
The imagery is incredibly visceral.
It is claustrophobic. Imagine standing in a flood. The water is rising rapidly. The current is pulling at your legs. It hits your waist, your chest, and finally the water level hits your chin.
You are gasping for air, almost completely drowning.
But it stops at the neck. Why doesn't it go over the head? Why doesn't God allow the Assyrian flood to completely annihilate Judah?
Because of the absolute sovereign boundary of God's covenant promise.
Ah.
The flood of judgment is incredibly severe. It brings the nation to the absolute brink of total extinction. Historically, Assyria captured every fortified city in Judah except Jerusalem. The water was truly at the neck.
But God sets a limit.
God sets a sovereign limit. He preserves a remnant. The waters cannot completely drown the covenant line, and they cannot cover the head because of who the land truly belongs to.
And who does it belong to?
The end of verse 8 provides this dramatic, sudden shift in tone. The flood has spread its wings across the entire breadth of the land. The devastation is total. But suddenly the prophet cries out a direct address, "O Emmanuel."
Wow.
The Hebrew literally translates to, "Your land, O Emmanuel."
Emmanuel, God with us.
The land does not belong to the invading Assyrian armies. It does not belong to the puppet kings of Syria or Israel. It belongs to Emmanuel.
That is the ultimate unshakable boundary. The overwhelming waters of temporal judgment and human malice smash against an invisible, omnipotent wall. The eternal decree of God to preserve his elect people through the promised Redeemer.
Yes.
Human fortifications fail, modern dams burst. But the fortress of Emmanuel stands forever inviolable.
And this brings us to the profound application for us today. Because the connection between Ahaz's failed political pragmatism and our modern world is just deeply convicting. Our sources overlap in a fascinating way here regarding systemic fragility and the false refuges we build.
Let's draw that line, because earlier you mentioned the Kakhovka-Type Catastrophe problem from the geopolitical source. The idea that modern societies concentrate all of their essential survival needs, their drinking water, their electrical power, their food irrigation, behind a single, highly vulnerable concrete wall.
Yes, we centralize our dependencies to maximize efficiency. We build these massive systems, whether they are hydroelectric dams, global financial networks, or intricate supply chains.
Right.
But in doing so, we create massive systemic fragility. We put all our faith in human engineering and human institutions to keep the chaos out.
And our theological source directly challenges that mindset, doesn't it?
It does. It refutes modern secular humanism. Humanism likes to believe that human history is just a naturalistic, evolutionary march toward moral progress.
We just keep getting better and better.
Right. It tells us that if we just build better structures, negotiate better treaties, elect better politicians, and engineer better societies, we can eliminate the threat of catastrophe. We can conquer nature, and we can conquer human nature.
But the ruins of the Kakhovka Dam and the historical reality of Isaiah 8 both prove that humanistic worldview to be a catastrophic illusion.
Completely. Carnal man constantly despises God's simple means of grace and places his trust in massive worldly structures, whether that is the ancient military empire of Assyria or the modern hydraulic engineering of the Soviet era.
We suffer from the illusion of safety.
We do. We trust in structures that are inherently flawed because they are built and maintained by fallen humans.
We do this in our own personal lives constantly, don't we? We watch the daily news cycle, we see the fluctuating economy, the political landscape shifting, the global conflicts escalating, and we panic, just like Ahaz panicked when he saw the armies marching toward Jerusalem.
Yes, the reaction is the same.
And when we panic, what do? We look for a massive worldly solution. We look for a new political leader to save us, or a new technological breakthrough to secure our futures. We want the Euphrates.
We want the big river.
We want something big, loud, and impressive to solve our problems. And in doing so, we completely ignore the daily, quiet provisions of God, the waters of Shiloah.
We ignore prayer, the reading of scripture, the quiet faithfulness of obedience.
Because they don't look flashy enough to solve our big problems. We are constantly trusting in human dams that will inevitably break.
It is a devastating critique of human nature. And our theological source notes something really interesting here, that the church today is entirely guilty of this exact same sin when it adopts pragmatic, seeker-sensitive methodologies.
Oh, expand on that. How does the church commit the sin of Ahaz?
Well, Ahaz looked at the quiet waters of God's provision and said, "That's not enough. I need the power of the world." Today, churches often trade the quiet, ordinary means of grace, the faithful preaching of the gospel, the simple administration of the sacraments, corporate prayer for flashy entertainment.
Massive marketing campaign.
Exactly. Political maneuvering or worldly power. They want to be impressive. They want to draw a crowd using the methods of the culture.
And when the church does that, it is repeating the sin of Isaiah 8.
Yes. They are rejecting the gentle waters of Shiloah with contempt, and they are literally inviting the raging waters of Euphrates into the sanctuary.
And what happens when those massive human systems, both secular and ecclesiastical, fail? Because the Kakhovka analysis showed us the terrifying speed of failure. When a centralized system breaks, the failure propagates downstream far faster than any institution can possibly respond.
The flood wave moves faster than bureaucratic coordination.
Exactly. When the dam breaks, your political alliances and your clever methodologies cannot stop the water. And when all earthly dams break, when the human institutions collapse and the floodwaters of crisis rise to our very necks, where is our ultimate hope?
The theological deep dive pivots beautifully here to the glorious Christological fulfillment of Isaiah 8.
We have to talk about Emmanuel.
Yeah.
Because it's not just a symbolic title representing God's generic presence. It's a specific person.
Yes, it is. The dramatic shift at the end of Isaiah 8.8, crying out, "O Emmanuel," points directly to the New Testament, to the incarnation of Jesus Christ. And the source makes a brilliant connection to the Gospel of John, specifically chapter 9, to tie all of this water imagery together.
I love this part.
Do you remember the quiet waters of Shiloah we discussed earlier?
Yes, the gentle aqueduct supplying Jerusalem that Ahaz despised.
Well, in John chapter 9, Jesus encounters a man who was born blind. And how does Jesus heal him?
He makes mud, right?
After making mud and anointing the man's eyes, Jesus tells him to go and wash in the pool of Siloam. Siloam is simply the Greek translation of the Hebrew word Shiloah. And the Apostle John explicitly includes a parenthetical note in the text to tell us that Siloam means sent.
Oh, wow. So Jesus is making a direct theological statement.
He absolutely is. Jesus Christ is the true Shiloah. He is the gentle, life-giving water sent from the Father to give light and life to spiritually blind sinners.
He did not come as a raging, conquering military river.
Which is what the Pharisees and Zealots wanted, much like Ahaz wanting the Euphrates. He came quietly, humbly, bringing the gentle grace of the covenant.
So the very thing that Ahaz and the people of Judah rejected with contempt, the gentle, unassuming grace of God, is perfectly and ultimately embodied in the humble, incarnate Christ.
Exactly. But the theological connection goes even deeper into the concept of the flood itself.
How so?
Because Jesus didn't just represent the quiet waters of grace, he also engaged with the catastrophic flood of judgment. The source explores how, on the cross at Golgotha, Jesus endured the ultimate hydro warfare.
Unpack that for us. How does the crucifixion relate to the imagery of floods and hydro warfare?
Throughout biblical theology, raging floodwaters, like the ones that swept away Noah's generation, or the Euphrates overflowing its banks in Isaiah 8, are a consistent symbol of the terrifying, unmitigated judgment of God against human sin.
Right.
On the cross, the overwhelming flood of God's divine, holy wrath against sin swept over the soul of Jesus Christ. The source quotes Psalm 69, which is a deeply prophetic, messianic psalm that describes the agonies of the cross.
What does the psalmist say?
The psalm begins, "Save me, O God, for the waters have come up to my neck. I sink in deep mire where there is no foothold. I have come into deep waters, and the flood sweeps over me."
Just like Isaiah 8 said the judgment would reach to the neck.
Yes, but here is the critical difference.
What is it?
For Judah, in Isaiah 8, the water stopped at the neck. A remnant was preserved. But on the cross, the flood didn't stop at the neck for Jesus.
He went all the way under.
He was completely submerged in the deluge of divine justice. He bore the full, unmitigated weight of the Father's wrath. He suffered the equivalent of eternal condemnation on behalf of his people, taking the full force of the flood so that those who are hidden in him, the elect, would never have to face a single drop of the floodwaters of eternal wrath.
So the very God who commands the flood, the sovereign Lord who brought up the Assyrian army, who governs the rising and falling of empires, is also the one who steps directly into the flood to save us from it.
He is. He is the sovereign Lord who, during his earthly ministry, stood up in a small boat on the Sea of Galilee, looked at a raging, chaotic storm that was terrifying seasoned sailors, and simply spoke to it.
He said, "Peace, be still."
And the wind and the sea immediately obeyed him. Because he controls every drop of the raging flood, he alone has the power to subdue it, and therefore he is the ultimate, inviolable ark of safety for his church.
That is a staggering synthesis. I mean, we have traveled from the shattered concrete ruins of the Kakhovka Dam in modern Ukraine, covered in toxic mud and surrounded by the horrors of modern warfare.
Quite a journey.
We've gone back thousands of years to the dusty courts of King Ahaz in Jerusalem, watching a panicked king sell his soul to an empire. And finally, we arrive at the cross of Christ, where the ultimate flood of judgment was poured out and absorbed.
It is a journey that reveals the unchanging nature of human depravity, the fragility of the world we build, and the absolute sovereignty of the God who saves.
And it leaves us with an inescapable application. It demands that we evaluate the foundations we are building our own lives upon.
It really does.
Exactly. As we bring this deep dive to a close, I want to ask you, the listener, to seriously evaluate your own foundations. Where is your refuge? When the crises of this world rise, whether they are personal, political, or global, what do you run to?
Are you trusting in the boastful, roaring rivers of this passing world?
Are you putting your ultimate hope in your bank account, your intelligence, your political affiliations, or the sheer engineering might of modern society? Because as we have seen today, every human dam will eventually burst. Every human refuge will eventually be swept away by the currents of time and judgment.
The systemic fragility of our world is real. The depravity of the human heart is a historical constant, and the judgment of a holy God is certain.
So I want to leave you with a final reflection to mull over, something that spans the entire scope of the biblical narrative. Think about this. Human history is entirely bookended by water.
Bookended by water.
It began in Genesis, with the Spirit of God hovering over the face of the deep, bringing order out of chaotic waters. It faced the catastrophic, world-ending deluge of Noah's day. We see it today in our own headlines as modern rivers are weaponized by tyrants to drown their neighbors and starve the innocent. The story of humanity is inextricably linked to the rising floods.
But Revelation chapter 22 tells us exactly how the story ends.
In the New Jerusalem, at the end of all things, the text says there is no more sea. The chaotic, destructive, warring oceans of human history are gone forever. Instead, there's only a pure river of the water of life, clear as crystal, flowing gently from the throne of God and of the Lamb. If the floodwaters of human history and divine justice are rising today, the most urgent question you can ask yourself is this: have you secured your place in the only ark that cannot sink?
Amen to that.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the waters of history, conflict, and truth. Until next time, keep your eyes on the foundation that holds when the floodgates open.